Isley Field, Saipan. 5:34 in the afternoon, March 9th, 1945. A ground crewman kneels beneath the belly of a B-29 Superfortress, unbolting the ammunition boxes from the lower gun turret. He is not repairing a jam. He is removing the bullets entirely. On direct order from Major General Curtis LeMay, 38 years old, the youngest two-star general in the United States Army, and a man about to gamble his career on a single radioed instruction typed onto 334 departure sheets across Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. Strip the guns, strip the armor, load only incendiaries, and fly to Tokyo alone, at night, at an altitude low enough to kill every man aboard if a single Japanese searchlight finds them. No massed formations, no fighter escort, no high-altitude sanctuary. Just unarmed bombers, one after another, crossing 1,200 miles of open Pacific to burn a city. LeMay has never told his own superior he intends to attack this way. He has not sent the plan to General Hap Arnold in Washington. He does not intend to. If Arnold reads it before the bombers are airborne, LeMay is certain the mission will be grounded. By the time anyone in Washington learns what LeMay has ordered, the first incendiary clusters will already be tumbling out of the bomb bay of a lead aircraft called Nan Nan Nan, 6 miles over Tokyo's most densely packed wooden district, and there will be nothing left to cancel. For 4 months, the doctrine had not worked, and everyone in the Marianas knew it. Since November 1944, the B-29s of 21st Bomber Command had flown out of the newly seized airfields of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam on a mission built entirely around one idea: the Norden bomb site, dropping high explosives from 30,000 feet in broad daylight, could hit individual factories with surgical precision. The same doctrine that had shaped the 8th Air Force's campaign over Germany. It was the article of faith the entire B-29 program had been built on, a 4-engine bomber pressurized for high-altitude flight, designed to fly above flak, above most fighters, and strike with a precision no Navy blockade or infantry campaign could match. Over Japan, the doctrine collapsed the moment it met the weather. American planners had never encountered anything like it. A river of wind screaming eastward at altitude, gusting past 200 miles an hour, invisible until B-29 crews flew directly into it and watched their ground speed do something no bombardier's manual had prepared them for. Bomb runs that should have taken minutes stretched or compressed unpredictably. Bomb sights calibrated for calm air produced scattershot results. Between November and February, barely 10% of bombs dropped on Tokyo fell within 1,000 feet of their aiming point. Factories walked away untouched. Crews flew 9-hour missions, burned enormous quantities of fuel fighting headwinds that could exceed their own airspeed, and came home having accomplished, by any honest measurement, almost nothing. Washington's patience ran out first. In January 1945, Major General Haywood Hansell, the officer who had designed the precision doctrine and defended it mission after mission, was relieved of command. His replacement was Curtis LeMay, pulled from the China-Burma-India theater, a man with a reputation for treating a failing tactic as a personal insult rather than an act of God. LeMay inherited more than a failed doctrine. He inherited a fleet of aircraft mechanically unsuited to the war it had been built for. The B-29's Wright R-3350 engines, pushed to sustain high-altitude cruise, overheated and caught fire at an alarming rate. American aircrews were, with grim regularity, losing men to their own engines before Japanese defenses ever touched them. What LeMay noticed, running the numbers through February, was the blind spot no one above him wanted to look at directly. Tokyo's residential core, the shitamachi, the low city of small workshops, wood frame houses, and paper walls packed close along narrow lanes, was not a target that needed precision. It was a target built to burn. A test raid on Kobe in early February, using incendiary clusters rather than high explosives, had shown promising results. And Japanese air defense over the home islands, LeMay's intelligence suggested, was thinner after dark than anyone in Washington had assumed. Night fighters poorly coordinated with ground radar anti-aircraft. Batteries calibrated for high-altitude daylight intruders, not low-flying shapes in the dark. The hubris LeMay was betting against was institutional, not personal. The assumption, baked into 4 months of failed missions, that heavy bombers survived by flying high and fighting through. LeMay's answer inverted every element of it. Go low at night, unarmed, alone. Every gun removed lightened each aircraft by roughly 1.5 tons, room enough for additional incendiary bombs. Every gunner left behind was one more man not risking his life for a defense LeMay had privately concluded wouldn't be needed. If he was wrong, 334 bomber crews, over 3,000 men, would be flying defenseless into the best defended airspace in the Japanese Empire. 5:35 p.m., March 9th. Guam. The first B-29 lumbers down the runway at North Field, engines straining against a fuel and munitions load heavier than any superfortress had carried into combat. It is airborne by 5:36. Behind it, at intervals of roughly 15 seconds, aircraft after aircraft follows. From Guam, from Tinian's North Field, from Saipan's Isley Field, until the total climbing into the dusk reaches 334. Each pilot has been briefed on something no B-29 crew has done before. No formation flying. Each aircraft is to fly the 1,200-mile leg to Japan independently, staggered by minutes, converging on Tokyo not as a single armored fist, but as an unbroken stream, wave after wave, for nearly 3 hours. 6 hours pass. Engines drone over Black Ocean. Somewhere over the Pacific, a tail gunner, his turret stripped, his gun position filled instead with incendiary racks, realizes there is nothing behind him but empty air where a weapon used to be. At the front of that stream flies Nan, carrying Brigadier General Thomas Power, sent aloft by LeMay as his eyes over the target. LeMay himself will not fly this mission. He will spend the night 800 miles away in a Quonset hut on Guam, waiting on radio silence. 11:30 p.m. Tokyo time. Air raid sirens begin sounding across the city. Then, in a decision that will prove catastrophic, many are called off. Japanese air defense controllers, watching a handful of aircraft on radar, misjudge the formation as a smaller reconnaissance flight, not the leading edge of the largest raid the war has yet produced. Some warnings are downgraded. Civilians who had begun moving toward shelters return to their homes. 12:08 a.m., March 10th. Power's Pathfinder crews reach their release point over the Shitamachi district and open their bomb bay doors. The first M47 incendiaries, canisters of napalm gel that ignite on impact, begin falling in a deliberate pattern, an enormous flaming X, laid down to mark the aiming point for every aircraft that follows. Within minutes, it is visible from 30 miles away. 12:15 a.m. The mainstream arrives, aircraft after aircraft, at altitudes as low as 5,000 feet, a height Japanese anti-aircraft gunners have not calibrated for, a height American doctrine 2 months earlier would have called suicidal, begin releasing clusters of M69 incendiary bomblets, 6-pound canisters that scatter on release and ignite on contact, each one capable of starting an individual house fire. A single B-29 can carry enough of them to ignite an entire block. By 12:30 a.m., the X marking the target is no longer necessary. The fire has become its own beacon. Wind. That is what the survivors remember first. Not the bombs, the wind. The individual fires, thousands of them, ignited within minutes of each other across a district of tinder-dry wood and paper, begin to merge. As they merge, they consume oxygen faster than the surrounding air can replace it, and the surrounding air rushes in to fill the vacuum. From every direction at once, feeding the blaze, accelerating it, until the fire is no longer a collection of separate house fires, but a single organism with its own weather. A firestorm. Winds inside it reach speeds. Fire officials will later estimate at over 50 miles an hour. Flame temperatures climb past 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Canal water, the water thousands of residents run toward, believing it will save them, begins to boil. There is no defended perimeter to retreat behind. There is no direction that is safe. Families who run for the Sumida River find the river already crowded, with bodies, the water itself lethally hot in places. Boats catching fire at their moorings. Wooden bridges collapse under the weight of crowds fleeing across them, dropping hundreds into water no cooler than the streets they left. Above it, the men flying the B-29s feel the fire before they see the full scope of it. Updrafts of superheated air slam into aircraft 2 miles above the ground, tossing 50-ton bombers like the crews are inside a thunderstorm rather than clear night sky. Waist gunners, the ones whose stations still exist, report the smell of burning flesh rising into the cabin at altitude thick enough that men reach for oxygen masks meant for thin air, not smoke. Tail gunners photograph a glow behind them that remains visible on the horizon for 150 miles of the return flight. On the ground, there is no single narrative anyone can hold on to. There is only sequence, fractured and immediate. A mother pours water over blankets to shield her children, and the water is gone in seconds. A fire warden, trained under pre-war civil defense doctrine to fight house fires bucket by bucket, watches that doctrine become meaningless in real time. Bucket brigades built for isolated fires, not for a storm consuming a square mile at once. Air raid wardens who ordered residents to stay and fight the flames rather than flee early are, within the hour, among the dead. 800 miles south, in the Quonset hut on Guam, Curtis LeMay does not sleep. He has no reconnaissance photographs yet, no casualty figures, nothing but the knowledge that 3,000 of his men are somewhere over a burning city in aircraft with no guns, and that the entire justification for stripping those guns rests on an assumption about Japanese night defenses he will not be able to confirm until the survivors land. He paces. He does not know, yet, whether he has just executed the most effective bombing raid of the war, or sent an unarmed fleet to be annihilated for nothing. By 2 a.m., the last bombers have released their loads. What they leave behind is no longer describable as a district. It is a single continuous ember field, 16 square miles wide, still growing. Dawn breaks over Tokyo on the 10th of March to a sky the color of ash. The fire has not fully burned itself out. In places, it still smolders through the morning. What used to be the Shitamachi, one of the most densely inhabited urban districts on Earth, is, in large sections, simply gone, not damaged, erased down to foundation stones and the twisted metal skeletons of a few reinforced structures that stood where wooden houses had not. The first Japanese officials to reach the district that morning cannot produce an accurate count of anything. Fire departments that existed hours earlier no longer have equipment, in some cases no longer have personnel. Bodies lie in the streets, in configurations survivors will later describe only in fragments. Families found together where they had huddled for shelter. Canals so full of dead that in places the water is barely visible. Estimates assembled in the following days and weeks will settle on a toll of roughly 100,000 dead in a single night, with over 1 million residents left homeless, figures that will make this raid, by immediate loss of life, more lethal than either atomic bombing 5 months later. Imperial Palace grounds, deliberately spared by American targeting instructions, stand largely untouched at the center of a landscape leveled around them, a detail that will not be lost on a Japanese public slowly beginning to grasp what happened, nor on a high command trying to manage what its people are told. Public broadcasts in the days after the raid minimize the scale of the destruction, describing damage in terms far short of what residents who walked through the ruins had witnessed themselves. The gap between the official account and the lived reality becomes, for many in Tokyo, its own kind of second injury, proof that the government either did not know the true scope of the disaster, or knew and would not say. On Guam, LeMay finally receives what he has been waiting for: preliminary reports, then reconnaissance photographs. The photographs confirm what the returning crews had already described in their debriefings. Devastation on a scale no single mission in the Pacific War had produced, achieved with a bomber force that suffered strikingly light losses. Of the 334 aircraft dispatched, fewer than 15 failed to return, a casualty rate that stuns planners who had built their expectations around the far bloodier arithmetic of daylight precision raids over a defended target. The gamble on defenseless, low-altitude bombers had not simply worked. It had worked far better, at far lower cost to American aircrews, than anyone above LeMay had believed possible. There is no time in the aftermath for either side to fully process what has happened before the arithmetic of the war moves on. For Japanese officials, the immediate task becomes containment of information as much as reconstruction, how to keep an already strained population from concluding that no city, no district, no night was safe. For American commanders, the immediate task becomes replication. If this worked once, against this target, at this cost, the obvious question was never whether to do it again. It was only where and how soon. The night of March 9th to 10th did not simply damage Tokyo. It rewrote the arithmetic both sides had been using to measure the war. For the United States, LeMay's gamble became doctrine literally overnight. Within days, the tactic he had not dared submit for approval before executing it became the standing operating procedure of 21 Bomber Command. Over the following 5 months, the same formula, low altitude, night, incendiary, stripped of defensive weight, would be repeated against dozens of Japanese cities, an air campaign that, by the war's end, would leave much of urban Japan in ash long before the atomic bombings of August ever entered the equation. The March 9th raid was not a single catastrophe in isolation. It was the proof of concept for a campaign that made firebombing, rather than the atomic bomb, the primary instrument of Japan's urban destruction in 1945. For Japan's leadership, the psychological toll ran deeper than the physical damage, severe as that was. The raid demonstrated in a single night that Japan's home islands possessed no meaningful defense against an enemy who had chosen to attack differently than doctrine assumed he would. Air defenses calibrated for high-altitude daylight bombers proved almost irrelevant against low-flying night raiders. A population that had been told the home islands were defensible learned, in the space of a few hours, that they were not. And unlike a battlefield loss reported from a distant island, this loss occurred in the capital itself, visible to the men making decisions in the same government buildings that survived only because the wind that night pushed the firestorm away from them. Historians remain divided on how to weigh what happened in moral terms. A debate this account does not attempt to resolve, but one no serious telling of the raid can ignore. What is not in dispute is the strategic outcome. March 9th proved, to American commanders who had spent 4 months failing to hit precision targets from 30,000 feet, that a change in altitude, timing, and munitions could achieve in a single night what months of high explosive daylight raids had failed to accomplish at all. It proved, to a Japanese leadership already losing the war in the Pacific and in the skies above its own cities, that the home islands themselves had become a front line. And it proved something narrower, more specific, and in its own way more haunting, that the decision LeMay made in a Quonset hut on Guam to send 3,000 men into the most heavily defended airspace of the empire without a single machine gun between them had not been recklessness. It had been a correct, brutal calculation, made without permission, validated only after the fact, at a cost measured not in American aircraft, but in a Japanese death toll that would not be matched by a single raid again until Nagasaki, 5 months and 1 atomic bomb later. LeMay would go on to say, of the choice not to seek approval before the mission launched, that he simply could not risk being told no. He was right that he wouldn't have been allowed to try it. He never expressed doubt that he would have tried it anyway. Somewhere over the Pacific that night, in the dark, in an aircraft with an empty gun turret and a full bomb bay, That calculation became a fire that could be seen from 150 miles away. Proof that the deadliest weapon LeMay sent to Tokyo was never the incendiaries at all. It was the guns he chose to leave behind.